Since it has French threaded pedals, I was concerned about the pedals, but these pedals are perfect. They spin beautifully, nice and tight. So the wheels had quite a bit of surface rust, and I wanted to make sure that they would clean up reasonably well. And they did. I don't have video of the process, but I used just metal polish. I happen to use Brasso and a cloth. For the bigger areas of rust, I used aluminum foil. You just wrap it into a ball and use it to rub on the particularly hard sections. It really does a good job of taking bigger areas of rust off. This is what the worst areas look like now, which is orders of magnitude better than what they did. And they're solid. It's all just surface rust. And alternately, the best of the areas polished up really rather nicely. These are Normandy hubs, pretty typical for this kind of bike. The back wheel cleaned up super well. It didn't have nearly as much surface rust on it. Worked a little bit on the central hub, but it's really hard to get the inside edges. And then the outer part of the hub where the spokes join is really difficult to do too. I finished the initial cleanup of the exterior of the wheels, getting the rust off earlier, so now I've started working on cleaning up the internals. The wheels felt like they spun pretty good, but most of the time with an older bike like this, if you take the bearings out, they're pretty gummed up. Sometimes there's real damage and you won't be able to use them. In this case, there's a little bit of grease left that I haven't gotten out, but they cleaned up really well. There's no corrosion or pitting or anything down inside on the cups. At first glance, the cones did not look too good. Hopefully you can see in there, it looks like some corrosion on the cones, so I was thinking I might have to get new cones, which is no big thing. But when I cleaned one of them up, the one that's left on the axle, this is the rear axle obviously, it cleaned up perfectly. Apparently some water got in the hub at some point, but what it caused to corrode was the ball bearings rather than the cups or cones. So this is going to clean up fine without having to get new cones. But you can see from a sampling of the ball bearings that they are pretty rough and corroded. Bearings are exceedingly cheap though. Do make sure you track or know how many go in each side and what size you need. I have a set of calipers just to back check, but typically they're 1/4 inch in the back and 3/16 in the front. I believe these are fit that criteria. So we've got this back axle apart. I've got to clean up the cone that I haven't cleaned up yet, and then we'll get some grease and get them back together. Typically when I do these, I don't remove the dust cover, which is kind of the rusty part on the outside. They tend to be a little bit fragile and you can tear them up trying to get them out. It's easy enough to get a little bit of grease and the bearings back in there without taking the dust covers off. It's inexpensive enough to get good quality ball bearings. I can't remember what I paid for these, but 100 of them wasn't much. There are some bicycle specific hub greases you can use. What I typically use is just marine grease. It doesn't tend to move out when you get water in them, in the hubs or stuff, and it's quite protective of the bearings. I don't wear gloves for a lot of bicycle maintenance, but bearings are an exception because I don't really feel the need to coat myself with grease. These take 9 bearings for the rear wheel. These are 1/4 inch. So there's a little bit of space in there. That's okay. That's what it's supposed to be like. There's enough grease that they're sticking, but I'm going to put a little bit more grease over the outside to make sure they stay in there while I get the axle in and get the other set of bearings in. The freewheel side, in case of an older bike, this is in fact freewheel rather than a free hub, is generally the more challenging side to put the bearings in. If I had the proper tool, I'd take the freewheel off. I don't have a specific tool for this, so I am going to put the bearings in the way it is, but it does involve reaching down a little deeper in there than what we did by having to get past the dust cover on the other one. But it still works. We won't go through the whole process, but just know it can be done, but it is a little bit more challenging. Sometimes having a set of tweezers to put the balls in can be useful. Got all the bearings in, got the axle back through on the side that I didn't remove the cones from. So now I'm gonna start the cone on this side and get it in there before a bearing decides to go slipping down somewhere it doesn't belong. It's on there, so we're at a good stopping point if we want to stop now. We've still got a couple of washers that are shims and then the lock nut to hold it all on there, and we'll want to get it adjusted right, which the rule of thumb is no wobble in the wheel, but spins as freely as possible. I think it's easier what Park Tool says, and I kind of like this, is just no wobble in the wheel. Just tight enough there's no wobble and go with that. It's very much a feel thing that you just have to do it. I felt totally uncomfortable doing it initially, and eventually you just get to where you know what it should feel like, and it works okay. I don't think I said this in the intro video, but my goal for this is to get this up to mechanically in good condition and visually appealing. This isn't going to be a restoration to show quality or anything even remotely like that. That's not what I'm into. I want a bike that looks reasonable and rides well, is reliable mechanically. So that's kind of what we're going for.